Post-traumatic stress disorder of abandonment is a psychological condition in which earlier separation traumas interfere with your current life. An earmark of this interference is intrusive anxiety, which often manifests as a pervasive feeling of insecurity. Insecurity is a primary source of self-sabotage in our primary relationships and in achieving long-range goals, for that matter. Another earmark is a tendency to compulsively reenact our abandonment scenarios through repetitive patterns. These are, but not only, defense mechanisms. Okay, I have with me to discuss abandonment and the connection with post-traumatic stress disorder, my FITTV contributing expert from the relationship journey, Marla Matthews. Hi, Martha.
Hello, nice to be here.
Marla.
There you go.
I almost forgot.
Makes me feel right at home.
Yeah, there you go. All right, so these emotional crises of abandonment can create a trauma, and it can be severe enough that the emotional imprint on an individual's psychobiological functioning is affected. What are some of the things that they might feel other than rejection, or common rejection and loss?
Well, panic disorder is a huge consequence. The pervasiveness of the disease, it's something that actually happens in the brain, the part of the brain that responds to flight or fight, so that when someone is abandoned over and over again, it could start in childhood, adulthood, later in life, but if this situation happens often enough, it very much brings about it this post-traumatic stress disorder, which is now being talked about as if the person is actually experiencing the same thing as a war veteran. Not quite on that level. However,
right.
Emotionally, how can you really compare emotions? It's apples and oranges.
Exactly.
We all react differently.
That's right.
So what you might feel is an intense reaction might be something different for someone else to cope with, but it brings about very much the same sort of panic. And really, panic is the opposite side of a coin as depression. When someone is going through panic attacks and a panic disorder, which even gets to be so severe, where the panic becomes ruling their life, it's another manifestation of depression. It just manifests differently.
It strikes me that, for instance, if you're having difficulty hearing someone and understanding what they are, it can exacerbate those feelings of abandonment that you experience in childhood or at some point secondarily in adulthood.
Well, those are triggers. You see, if you have enough wounds and you have enough problems and loss and tragedies in your life, if you will, we develop more triggers so that the person, let's say someone's going through a situation, one of the most tragic things you can imagine is the loss of a child. All right, now people would say, but that's not abandonment. Well, it's the most severe form of abandonment, even though it wasn't a purposeful abandonment. It was
it's something that was there, that was in love or in life, and then it's not there anymore.
Huge, exactly.
It's a form of what you're referring to as abandonment.
Yeah, abandonment. So abandonment, maybe we should define what abandonment is. It takes on many different qualities. Abandonment does not necessarily mean the loss of a marriage or a job, although those can be in that consequence. It's a tragic loss of any kind where the person has absolutely no control of getting that person or the situation back again. Empty nest syndrome, when women go through losing their children to college, they get married and they're all alone, that can bring upon triggers too. Perhaps nothing close to the kind of triggers someone would experience when they lose a child through death, but nevertheless, again, triggers of abandonment.
So the relative experience you have, like an empty nest, for instance, which I recall and relate to because I went through that when my son left the house.
Yeah.
I was the sole parent, so when he left, it was just me in the house.
Exactly.
Oh, and the dog. I had the dog, but he's not the same.
Right.
So,
but still, people experience that with loss of pets as well. Yeah.
But I felt a loss, and I wondered sometimes, might it have affected me in some way? I don't know. But I mean, that's a perfect example of somebody who can go through that.
Yeah, exactly. And it's actually, it's more intense with the divorced single parent, because if you're a single parent and your family is just that one child,
Right.
that also you interchange roles. You become husband and wife,
Right.
mother, father. So it's sort of convoluted in a sense. So it would even be more of an abandonment than if you had a wife and 4 children that were going on.
Sure.
It's a
You can
different
share.
situation.
It's not a shared responsibility. It's
Right.
all on you.
Right.
So when that's gone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. More PTSD. Yeah.
All right.
And what is post-traumatic stress disorder, too? You know, it's kind of one of those words that are being used today. It's very much, PTSD has been also connected to people that have either become narcissists as a result of abandonment. They take on the narcissistic qualities. We did a very successful show where we got close to 70,000 views and growing on narcissism. And also people that have been abandoned, for some reason, are more drawn to people that are narcissistic as well. So what's that connection? I mean, there's so
You know
much
what that
to
show
say
made me
there.
think? It made me think of the fact that because so many people experience the word narcissism,
Yeah.
what it means to somebody is apparently broader than I knew. Not just because of the numbers being raised
Right.
high, because the amount of interest.
Yeah, exactly. And also it shows the amount of interest. We're in a very self-culture. Selfies. We didn't even know what selfies were a few years ago. We see people of all ages, probably more so young people, taking pictures of themselves.
Right,
I mean,
right.
our whole culture promotes almost the whole narcissistic qualities as well. But yeah, I mean, with abandonment, though, so many things. Addiction is a direct correlation. People that self-medicate with substances, alcohol, drugs, is a way to quell the intense pain that comes from abandonment. I mean, the word, when you even say the word, it takes on qualities all of its own. The word abandonment, it almost sounds to me like a frightening word. It would be like a great Hitchcock film, Abandonment.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's like, it has
Abandoned
exactly.
on the earth.
Yeah, it has fearful qualities just in the word. So I think that we're not really looking enough at the severe consequences to what abandonment does to a human being. And further, if I can also add, I really believe that we're only as sick as our secrets. And what do I mean by that? Is that if someone feels that they are lonely because of their abandonment, that takes on almost a disease-like quality as well in itself, rather than, you know, I do support groups throughout Long Island. I'm talking to adults 50 and over that are widowed, divorced, single, different issues of empty nest, huge abandonment issues. And what I've learned is that when I ask them in their groups, who in this room is lonely and is interested in dating, it's almost like I'm asking them who's committed a crime.
Right.
There's a shame-like quality to abandonment and PTSD, and that's one place to start with the healing, when you just have to show someone, look, more people than not suffer from abandonment issues and trauma issues than people that are not suffering.
I would like the people who suffer from that to recognize that some of that is a natural defense. Some of it is more serious than others.
Right.
I think you said before there was levels of...
There are levels, yeah,
Right.
like depression and anxiety, you know, and all psychological and all human nature. There's all different
The
levels.
thing is not to take it so personal that you
Yeah.
think you're a nut or you're a whack.
Yeah.
Because some
Well, you
of
may
these
be a
things are
nut,
very
but you-
normal.
you still
That's
may-
another story.
That's another show.
Where's your nut show, right?
Exactly. However, right, it doesn't need to take on that shame-like, you know, quality. And unless you're going to talk about what your defenses are and what your wounds are, you're never going to be able to go on the road to heal. And that's really the point to everything we do, right, is to get better.
I have something I picked up in the notes that you gave me before about I didn't want to get too far, but the language was it just hit me about once our abandonment fear is triggered, it can lead to what this guy Daniel Coleman calls emotional hijacking. That is that was relative to me, because how I deal with that in my own head is that when something occurs, my emotions now move to places I didn't contemplate before. It kind of throws off my logic, and I think that's probably going to be true for a lot of people.
Emotional hijacking, yeah.
I mean,
So what
now
is that?
you just
Yeah.
pulled
Right.
out something that wasn't there, and now here it is, and I'm dealing with this, and it hijacked.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
hijacked my
So that really
my psyche, you know, my balance.
Yes, right. Right. So that really what you really need to deal with and what you really want to have your life about is not what it's about then, right? You
That's
kind
right.
of
It
become
goes
off
outside
course.
of handleability,
Right.
for lack of
You're
a better
off
word.
course. Handleability. Yeah, correct.
Right.
Yeah. Well, again, that's where I say it all becomes distorted because it's something that as human beings we're trying to cover up rather than share with other people. You know, again, when you're in a support group and you see that you're not alone in your suffering, which is why the 12-step programs, they've even talked about, I believe in that article, is abandonism, like alcoholism. It becomes so pervasive that it becomes an ism, like a support group, alcoholism, drug abuse, you know, all the other situations that 12 steps are about.
Continuing in the same vein about the hijacking, if it occurs frequently enough, its chronic emotional excesses can lead to things that we just kind of like highlighted about: self-deprecation, isolation, secondary conditions like depression, anxiety, which you mentioned before, obsessive thinking, which people get locked into an obsession, they can't get it out of
what
their
is
head.
OCD?
And negative narcissism, our favorite topic.
Negative narcissism.
And they become addictions, and that's what I was referring to also. You can actually get locked out of your ability to function in your logic. So the hijacking occurs. This was so it caught my head. I can't talk about this for a whole
say that
show.
again. You get locked out of.
You get locked out of your ability to balance. You now are dealing with something that was. It's actually removing yourself from your ability to work in your normal fashion. You're moving yourself out, and now
you become something you're not as a result of the trauma. That's the PTSD. You know, many people going back, it's normally thought of PTSD as war. You know, the consequences of being a veteran. And again, you're not going in the war and coming out the war the same way you're going out, correct? So it's the same thing with the emotional abandonment.
That's right.
You are not the same person before a loss and before, I mean, think of here's a good situation. The women that are abused physically. One of the biggest questions people ask me is why do they stay in those relationships? Is because the fear of abandonment and being alone is actually more intense than being on their own. So that's one of the things that they're now dealing with, the PTSD of staying in that kind of situation.
Sometimes
rather to avoid the abandonment.
And there's a sense of feeling that they're alive. The punishment can sometimes be a reward.
Yeah.
Weird, but I know.
It's not numb. There's something going on. Yeah.
And rather that.
They're more familiar with the abuse.
Yeah, than emptiness.
Than the
Let me talk about a couple of the characteristics of the abandonment issue that causes this post-traumatic stress. There's an intense fear of abandonment that interferes in forming primary relationships in adulthood.
Yeah.
I had once dated a woman who talked about facing this issue of losing her father. And she said, if you want to end this relationship, but she said this to me personally, so it's exactly online.
Yeah.
If you want to get rid of me, just abandon me.
Ah, okay, so to repeat again
but she knew it.
She knew it.
This is what's interesting about it. She said that early on in our relationship, if you want to get rid of me, abandon me.
Really? Because that was...
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, really. So what happened?
True that.
So did you?
Yes, yes I did.
You did. So what was it? She was just there was too many emotions going on there for you to deal with? Negative emotions?
Too many personality issues that I had that I wasn't comfortable with. I didn't understand them.
Yeah.
And I began to be awkward about my response. So I can't blame her completely for my awkwardness about it. But I felt awkward about the way her personality was, how she delivered.
Well, you know what fear is, with the acronyms for fear, false emotions appearing real. So we can relate that back to abandonment and, being abused and harmed and et cetera, et cetera. We can go on with the whole negative relationships. But if you're in fear, you can't also be in love. You can't have so much fear in a relationship and also really have a healthy, loving. They kind of cancel each other out. So this woman was almost predisposed to a failure.
Right.
And she was sabotaging it,
she
consciously or otherwise.
Already knew. I don't know. Yeah,
Maybe
it's interesting to know. I don't know the answer to that question, but certainly that was relative in that case.
Yeah.
There's a tendency towards self-defeating behavior patterns that sabotage your life goals,
your
loves, and your career.
Yeah.
And often, from what I'm familiar with, a fear of intimacy, sex, and even loving somebody completely as opposed to loving somebody superficially or just sexually.
Right.
Or emotionally because they remind you of their mother or something. I'm making this up, but whatever other connection you can make.
Well, the fear of getting so close again and opening your heart and your life and your soul and everything, just you again, is so much greater than the wanting to have the love and the intimacy. That's such a severe consequence of abandonment, which goes right to the PTSD that we started talking about. But when your fear is greater of being hurt and left than the possibility of having a happy relationship, you are in intense PTSD. And that's happened. I see that at least in half the people that come to my groups.
And you become uncomfortable with taking the natural risk of a relationship. You know, like, go
It's
ahead.
more than uncomfortable.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, people should just, I'm just saying.
Yeah, I mean, people
would love to
can't
see 'em
eat,
just
they
do
can't
it.
sleep. We're talking
Just
about all
have
this.
your relationship instead of fighting yourself before you get into it.
Yeah, but when you think about someone suffering, again, back to the war, these people oftentimes are so sick they have to be hospitalized. They can't eat, they can't sleep, they have psychiatric breakdowns. This is the same thing, is that when you meet someone and you're suffering severe PTSD, you're so afraid that you're going to love them and they're going to love you and then they'll leave you, that you do
The
everything.
thought of the loss, in other words.
Yeah, the loss
Yeah.
is bigger than any possibility of being happy. It's just it's not. Again, the brain is reacting to a fight or flight reaction, just like in panic disorder. It's the same thing.
The loss situation leads me to the next question.
And actually, the
which-
brain changes
Right.
from all that too. It
Right.
actually, if you were to do a diagnosis of that person with the brain before and then after, the brain does change. It's really true.
That's the amygdala portion of the brain.
How do you pronounce that?
Amygdala.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
The emotional contingency area.
Yes, exactly. So it is chemical. It really is happening to your system, yeah.
A tendency to repeatedly subject yourself to people or experiences that lead to another loss and another
Yeah.
or another trauma.
Or another trauma.
And that's the continuation theory of abandonment. Now, this is like wicked. It's wicked to think about.
Yeah.
Because if you're already going through, or if you recognize it, it's even worse. If you can't deal with your recognition, you're going to have it again. A likelihood. You'll have that
if you
same theory again.
recognize it and you seek help, it's better. If you recognize it and you just live in a state of fear and panic, and you self-medicate with food and drugs and even people, but if you seek help, no, the recognition is a good thing. That's the first place to heal. You can't heal what you don't reveal.
Right, but
you can't go to a cardiologist and complain about your hip.
That's
You get
why
that? You know, you
I
have to
get
talk
it.
about what's really going on.
That's why the continuation theory of abandonment makes sense to me, that if you don't get the support you need, it might happen again.
Yeah, exactly. It could happen again anyway. Nobody knows what's going to happen when you meet someone. However, if your senses are all off and your brain is off and your heart is off, the chances of it happening again and again and again, in terms of someone abandoning you, not through death, but through,
like divorce.
rejection.
The next area I had was divorce,
Yes.
which is a common one that I face.
Right.
So people in the process, and I'm a divorce mediator, so I can't speak of any too closely because I'm held to confidentiality. Thank you for the word. One person was so shocked by it that she looks at me as the person who's ending it. She doesn't look at the husband who's ending it.
Oh, really? It was a transference onto you?
Yeah.
Oh, that's very interesting.
She deals with her husband, who had an affair,
Okay.
more than she deals with me.
Okay. And that's another thing, too, the displaced anger, sort of in
That's
the
what
same
that
vein
is,
that
yeah.
you were talking about.
Yeah.
So many times people are hurt by one person, but they're not able to, either the person's dead or they won't talk to them for whatever reason. So they displace that onto all the new people that come into your life. You can't have a happy relationship
Yeah, how
if
are you ever
someone's-
going to be happy with somebody like that? Yeah.
Well, they can't be, and you know what's really sad about the whole thing is that the behavior becomes I don't know what the word I'm looking for. It becomes something they're in a room and they're trying to work their way out, like in a web-like situation, and they're not able to get out of that behavior because they don't know how, and they don't even know that they're doing it.
That would be like a bad dream.
You don't
I think.
exactly like a dreamlike state. If you don't know that you're displacing your pain from back to your childhood or your marriage or wherever, if the woman was raped, let's say, and she has an anger towards all men, if you don't know it, how are you going to fix it?
Right. and it's the same thing you were saying before.
Yeah.
Good idea to look at help lines when you recognize that some trauma has affected you. A lot of people have the trauma and it goes incognito. And they go through life reacting to some kind of trauma and they have no clue.
Exactly.
They have no clue.
Well, that's it. Yeah, to me, I think that the more you know, the better you do. The more you know, the better you do.
Except for one type of person, which I don't know
Which
what you
type?
would call that. I don't have a name for this kind of person. But there are people who have this...
Is he running for president? Kidding.
No, he's the one who's still there, I think. I think there's a lack of ability to move your mind out of your problem, and you can't just jump out, and sometimes you can see it. And you know a little bit about it, you see it, you know a little bit, oh my God, here I am again in this area. That's what I was referring to about that kind of person. And then
well, that's the
they never
definition
get
of
out of it.
insanity. You keep doing the same thing over and over again, but you expect different consequences, different results, rather.
I'm not sure this kind of person I'm speaking about expects the results, but, continue, because you're making a point there.
Yeah, but if you want different results, you're going to have to do it differently.
Right.
So right there, again, it really is an insane way of thinking that if you're always used to picking the same kind of person, and I'll give you an example.
But the recurrence feels normal.
Well, it's familiar, but it doesn't mean the person's happy or functioning well.
I didn't say that,
familiar,
right? Yeah,
right.
I got that. Yeah, it's just like, oh my God, here I am again.
Well, that's where it has to be. That right there, the identification that the behavior is familiar, but that it's not working for them. I'm not a big fan of Dr. Phil, but he said something years and years ago that I always remember. The question I ask people is, how is it working for you? If you're not having peace and serenity, really, peace is everything.
How is your effed up life working?
Exactly. If it's not working, then you need to take a look at how to change it in a healthy way, not to become more dysfunctional. And that's the problem when your mind gets on this path of PTSD, which comes from abandonment and many other situations. It's hard to really know that you're being so dysfunctional because it becomes the norm for you. The anxiety and the depression, the abusive behaviors, becoming a narcissist, drawn to one, all becomes normal.
What happens when you see a visible imbalance with somebody in their social interactions? Do you assume that they have abandonment issues or post-traumatic stress, or because people overreact to things sometimes?
Yeah.
And you can see that there's an imbalance. They're overreactors.
Right. It may be from you don't know, but that something's going on. Yeah, there are some.
But those people stand out as needing help, I guess was my point.
Right.
You can just see them, oh my God, that's something you wouldn't ordinarily do. In
Overly
that kind of
dramatic
situation.
right, because either they are seeking attention unconsciously, they're really saying, help me, I don't know how to get help. Or again, that's just how it's a coping skill, Chris. That's just how they've learned to cope with their pain.
Some people have extreme sensitivity to perceived rejections.
Yeah, because they've been rejected over and over. Here's the thing, if you kept eating the same food for years and years and years and you kept getting food poisoning, eventually you're going to stop eating that food. That's logical. Well, but that's what happens with abandonment issues. Rather than trying to change themselves so they learn how to pick maybe a better partner, a better suitor, number one, that would take treatment and self-recognition. You have to also do your own list of what you want to change about yourself. But let's put all that aside. They'll just avoid relationships and avoid getting close to people for intimacy.
Some people in that regard about seeing themselves, sometimes they don't see their own stuff.
Oftentimes people don't see their own stuff.
And they sometimes blame others for things that they have as a symptom.
Sometimes
I've seen that more than once.
Right, it's a mirror. The very things that we have about ourselves that are uncomfortable.
It's not me, it's you that has the problem.
Right, are the things that we see in other people that are so difficult.
What is that? That causes that.
Well, what is that? Is the inability to do your own
management.
12 steps, what do they call it? There's a fourth step to that, is to do your own personal inventory. And once you do that, it's okay, now how can I, none of us are perfect. We're all imperfect on this planet, just trying to have some sort of a peaceful journey. But if you're constantly looking outside of you, what's the one common denominator of all the people in your life are hurting you? It's you. That's the only person, by the way, that we can fix. We can't fix anybody else.
Right.
So if we get help ourselves, because in some ways water seeks equal level. the healthier we get, the healthier person that we will attract and draw in our lives. So if we become healthy, we will be able to spot that person that's dysfunctional, so maybe we won't have another relationship where we're abandoned. Rather than giving them 2 years to break our heart and to break us down, we'll give them 2 dates and we'll know. You see the point? But the only way to do that is self-discovery first.
It's critical. I know what you're saying. But it's amazing how many of these symptoms I've looked at just now, some of the ones we've gone through.
I have all these things.
No, I've seen it. I've seen it.
Yeah.
I've seen it so often. It's amazing. And
yeah.
And if we only knew,
and
right?
It becomes the norm in our culture. That's what's so sad. I mean, for people to insult other people verbally and to harm them and to not be kind and compassionate and respectful, this is how we should be. And these are the kinds of people that we should be wanting in our lives, that edify us and lift us and bring us up emotionally and give us respect and compassion. But you see, it's quite the opposite.
It's a big one for me.
And
I
almost
need to have some respect for my abilities, for Pete's sake.
Yeah, to people to respect you, to respect yourself. If we were all like on this level, we wouldn't have half the problems in our culture that we have.
Yeah, that's for sure.
It's all about self-absorbed jealousy and self-motives. Yeah.
There's a tendency to feel hopelessly hooked on a partner who is emotionally distancing. That's a fairly normal occurrence, but it's exaggerated by abandonment. So you feel like you can't leave this person
because you're afraid of what it's going to feel like to be on your own. Yeah, and that's where the healing begins. To know that it's like this. I know we don't have a lot of time, so I'll make it brief. One of the treatments that works so well is to be your own parent, to do your own parenting. Take a hold of little Chris, little Marla, whoever that person is, and be the parent and love them in the way that you were not loved. Nurture yourself in the way that you would want to be nurtured. We can't expect a stranger to come into our life and care for us the way we know we need to be cared for. So that's the first step, is to admit that we have the problem, that we have abandonment issues, and one of the ways to fix them is to become our own parent. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and to actually have the visual of taking a hold of yourself and saying, okay, I'm going to treat myself well.
We got 1 more minute. I just want to respond to the great term I see in here called emotional epoxy. We got 1 minute left. Give me a little feedback on, because you get attached with emotional epoxy. This is about being so attached to this negativity that you become stuck to it. You can't seem to get free of it.
Because that's all you know. That's all you know. It's a familiar pattern. That's why people tend to pick the same people with different faces but the same kinds of behaviors, because they're not looking at themselves and where to change.
Right.
That's where the growth starts first, not outside, but within ourselves.
Thank you very much, Marla Matthews. It's a fantastic idea.
Thank you.
Abandonment is a very big issue today, and I think everyone should take a glimpse at some of what we've just talked about in the show.
And forgiveness. You have to, before we end, you have to forgive yourself and all the people. That's a really big point.
Right.
The people that have abandoned you, because forgiveness is a gift we give ourselves. It's really a gift to let go.
And they have varying degrees. They have varying degrees of
Yeah.
it, so I mean, you don't have to consider yourself nuts if you get caught with this.
Yeah.
You've been watching FIT TV, the program that brings you behind the scenes of our divorce culture. At FIT, we know you cannot get this information on your own, so we'll bring it to your TV every single week. We always invite all opposing views. My name is Chris DiMaggio. Thank you for watching FIT TV, and we'll see you again.